We've just done a session on the issue of creating value from byproducts, looking at it through the lens of hides and skins. And there's some excellent work through the Pasture for Life stall, and also Fibre Shed here around that. But here we're going to be focusing on the issue of wool as a byproduct. And I guess I'm going to change that around a little bit from the start, and I'm going to talk about wool as a co-product for meat, because we are not talking about something that is waste, even though it is treated that way currently. We are not talking about something that has no value in real terms, even though it does currently. And we are talking about an incredibly valuable product in terms of its environmental impact and its ability to replace what we've turned into in terms of a society that's based on products from fossil fuels and plastics, and a chance for us to really look at the value of on how we can create value from and business from wool as part of the cycle of producing sheep. We're going to look at some key questions here. What are the challenges? What are the changes that are needed? What is the infrastructure? What are the business models? But I hope the main thing that we'll do here is get some real inspiration from our panelists. So I'll just very briefly introduce you to who they are, and then I'll give them a chance to tell you a little bit more about themselves, the work they do, and why they're here to talk to you about wool today. And then we'll get into the meat of the discussion. So first of all, we have Jennifer Hunter from Fernhill Farm. And then we have Stephen Trix from the Portland Sheep Breeders Group. We have Maria Benjamin from Dogson Wood. And we have India Hamilton from Haifa Consulting. Is that the right way to pronounce it? Excellent, good. I didn't fall over on that one at least. So can I just give you each a couple of minutes, 2, 3, 4 minutes, just to talk about why this is such an important subject to you and your role in it. Start with you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much. So hello, I'm Jen from Fernhill Farm. So we're regenerative farmers just south of Bristol on the top of Cheddar Gorge. So my life looks very much like this. We have a homebred herd of Aberdeen Angus, which is for meat and also leather these days. We do a lot of conservation grazing. That picture there is of 500 pure Shetlands. We've now used British genetics to create a multi-purpose ewe. So we're producing very fine, colourful wool from a half-bred Shetland Romney ewe. And if you see the little picture down at the bottom there, you'll notice that the sheep are not woolly when they have their lambs with them. So this is what we have instigated to add value to British wool. So we pre-lamb blade shear all our pregnant ewes in March. And then we also take the wool off the lambs in autumn. We produce hogget and mutton, but also fine, colourful wool. There's just some benefits of blade shearing, which I'm very happy to talk to people about later on if they need to be. But this is our sort of standard. So you'll see the Red Bull in the corner. I was very fortunate enough 10 years ago to be awarded a Nuffield Scholarship Travel Bursary. So I sort of learnt the ways of wool producing in, countries where they predominantly are fibre producers rather than meat. And so we have grading tables, we throw the fleece onto the table, we do all of those, which, we create yarn batches so that it's a quality fibre. People can invest in what we are producing. In 2017, we retrained to be regenerative farmers through holistic management with the Savoury Institute 3LM Hub. So this is what our sort of data recording looks like. So every July, we look at each field, we measure it for all the dynamics, the indices, we get a score. As we go up the scale, we are verified as regenerative. That pops us onto the land to market platform. So that's just the cycle that we see quite often, how it works. So we regenerate, we become verified, brands can then come to us and then consumers can buy from the brands, and we just need more of it. And these are some of the people that we've worked with. So yeah, hope that helps.
That was a whistle-stop tour, but we'll be able to come back more, I think, to really dig into what works and how it works. Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about your background and why you're here today to talk about the value of wool?
Yes, well, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for everyone coming along. My wife and I started out in keeping sheep about 20 odd years ago, purely as a byproduct, if I can use it, of buying a house which happened to have some spare grass and we needed something to mow it. But genetic insanity prevailed. My father had been a GP, he kept sheep. Uncles and cousins were proper sheep farmers. And so we ended up buying 5 Portland ewe lambs, and from there built up a small flock, not big, nowhere near the size of Jen's flocks, running 20 Portland ewes. But Portlands are important because 50 years ago they were nearly extinct. There were only 40 females in the country and about 8 males. Now we have about 2,000 females in the country, 300 or 400 registered males. And I got to end up as chair of the Portland Sheep Breeders Group a few years ago, and got persuaded gently into some wool projects, which we'll come back to shortly.
That's great. And so, wool projects. Yeah, just go ahead. That's great.
Sorry. So yeah, I'm Maria. I live and work in the Lake District with my partner. It's his family farm. I joined him coming from an art background, and not being great at the farming side, I took it upon myself to do the farm diversification, which meant I didn't have to get a proper job. I aimed to make money on the farm. So one of the things I did was seeing how wool was really devalued. I was looking at how I could add value to our own clip, which we were able to do. But then looking beyond that, I was interested in how we could support other farmers, because at first I was telling them, just process your own wool and start a wool business, but that's not for everyone. So we started buying other farmers' wool, processing that, paying them better than they were getting paid, selling it as a bulk to British Wool. So yeah, in 2016 we just got 20 kilos processed just to try it out basically, and then last year we had 9 tons processed. That was for Lake District Tweed mainly, and a bit for the Wool Library, which is another business that I run. So we have worked with mills around the country, and we have had some wool processed in Italy, but with the Lake District Tweed we have everything processed in the northwest, all within 100 miles, and I think that's is great to be able to support these other businesses that are local to us and have a real connection with them. So yeah, as I said, we pay farmers a better price for the wool. We collect it all, take it to Bradford, and it's great for the farmers to see their wool turn into a beautiful product which people like. It's actually, that's one of the best parts of this project, is seeing pride from farmers that their products are really valued because they're being valued. So that's kind of really the most important bit of why we do it.
I like that idea of the two complementary pieces of price and pride of the product. India, you've been around a whole range of different food system spaces and working on innovation and system change and so on. I'd love to hear a little bit about your interests, your background, but also your interest in the wool sector here.
I think where I started was, the question is, how do you get good food to people? And I realised that I set that question for myself with lots of caveats: pay the most for it, make it as cheap as possible, make it adaptable to health and climate change, and all of these things. The question became more and more complicated. But what I realised is that's going to be a life's work to work that out. And what most businesses do is judge people by their economic position and market to that. So as businesses grow, you create these divides. So when you want to try and get good food to people and believe that everyone should get it, you've got to really reimagine every aspect of decision making across the entire supply chain. And I fundamentally believe that farmers are work out if they don't have to change in a way, and neither does the consumer, and all the bits that we invented in the middle can really start to have some adaptation about it. So I sort of held this question through the last about 18 years, and had to head towards academia, experimental stuff, work with artists. It's a question that every subject plays a role in. And then I went back to my home place, which is Jersey, and everywhere everyone says economies of scale, and how sheep farmers in England aren't as big as Australia, therefore get this many tons in, and therefore. But I came from Jersey, it's 9 by 5 miles, and it's got a really valuable agricultural system. And farmhouses, which are enormous, this is before the tax position, they were enormous, they're 50 metres apart from one another. And I was thinking, there is something else going on apart from the need to acquire more land. And what is that? And what are the decisions around that? And story of place, that, all these different aspects that add value. And that has become a kind of method of thinking about business and subtly understanding this. And it's what brought me, well, we were friends first, because Maria's fantastic. But it's what brought us together in a kind of workplace. There are similarities between the Lake District and Jersey. It has a really strong identity. The story of place, which Maria constantly designed products that mean something to that place. I kind of want to nick your thing about. She's creating a non-fiction brand, and the storytelling is phenomenal. Sorry, it's a fabulous line. And so we've been working together for the last probably year, maybe longer before, really trying to think how to grow through ecologies of scale and really add value where small and diversity is the best part and the best asset of a business decision. Because I know from research in Jersey that businesses that connect with the more brands, more producers, the more people, the more resilient they are over time. I can see that. And so how does that happen here? And that's kind of what brought us together.
It's really inspiring already. I guess it also sounds like quite a long way away from your kind of very intensive meat sheep production, and what has got us into the space of not being able to value wool or not the society not valuing wool, not putting a price on wool, because it's just not part of that picture. I should just say we did a session at the Oxford Real Farming Conference back in January, and that really dug into the global picture of wool, and the challenges around the wool industry and so on. So that is recorded, and it is available, I think, through the ORFC YouTube pages. But do reach out to me, Lesley Mitchell at Sustainable Food Trust, if you need to find that, because it was a really powerful discussion. We're not going to focus so much on that here. I think what I would love to know, Jen, from you is, if you were talking to someone who was setting out at this point in time, what are the challenges that you can see as a farmer in plain sight, and what would your advice be to them about what they need to think about to be able to step into this space?
Okay, great question, thank you, because I jokingly say you have to really like sheep and you have to really like wool, because there is a complete sort of almost like rejection of what wool is. And so many shepherds who are not shearers generally just, push the wool to one side, and, they've been led to believe it's been labelled a byproduct for so long, we have a disassociation with its true value. So we would suggest, make sure you like what you're looking at. If you're a shepherd, you have to like the sheep that you're working with. fundamental, it has to be very comfortable living in your actual environment. So we are 850 feet above sea level and the sea is 12 miles away. So, we get a lot of weather. We had 9 inches of rain in February alone this year. And, our sheep are 100% grass-fed. They have to be able to live in conditions like that. So we have stuck with British breeds and we have used hybrid vigor. So we've combined genetics to create something that is multi-purpose. And, we really like wool clothing. So we have gone for yarn-producing sheep breeds in that we're attracted to fibre length. If you're not interested in creating yarns, then fibre length is not such a vital sort of, component of what you want from your sheep. So, and I think what really does happen a lot is the wrong breeds are used to create the wrong finished items. So if you say, I want to create clothing, then go for something that has got a low micron. Nobody wants to be wearing wool that is from something that is a high micron, so is actually, quite scratchy to wear, because it just creates the wrong sort of, the wrong message. Just briefly on the regen side, we're kind of at the forefront of it, and so we have tried to sort of lead by example. It's not been easy, it's been long and slow, but I do think that there is just a heightened interest in a realisation that British yarns are available, and that's where you're seeing some of the bigger companies that have traditionally just been merino, so spinning and knitting and weaving merino, they're actually going, oh, British wool again. So, these are things to think about if somebody is, genuinely considering about, high quality clothing from, British sheep breeds.
Thank you. And I guess, Stephen, why did you decide to work with fleece as opposed to lawnmowers or perhaps a lamb chop?
I don't know if it was a decision I ever made consciously, actually. It's just one of those things that came up. Perhaps before I answer that question, I should pick up on the 2 photos which I hope are still in front of you. This does demonstrate, and with respect to John, that it is possible to make something beautiful using British yarn. But why do we do it? I can give you, the practical answer is that back in August 2021, we received a letter from British Wool saying that our previous year's consignment of 44 kilos was going to generate £5.42. That is 12.9 pence per kilo on average. This is a nonsense. I just paid the shearer £100 to shear 30, 40 sheep. I spent probably at least £10 on fuel, taking the wool to the depot, and here they were going to pay me, or even pay Sarah, even more damaging, £5.42. It's a complete travesty. Fortunately, thanks to RBST and indeed the new management at British Wool, an opportunity came up to launch a new project, which ultimately a year later became the Portland Wool Project. I happened to be chair of the Portland Sheep Breeders Group at the time, so it fell to me to try and get this off the ground. And through cajoling and encouragement, we did manage to get enough breeders together to produce over 1,000 kilos of wool. And I'm delighted to say that Maria took it on. So we ended up with a position where not only did people feel that they were getting something useful out of it, we were also getting 10 times the price that we had got from British Wool previously. And ultimately, we did produce something beautiful. And I'm going to turn around because I don't have a glamorous assistant to do this for me.
Can I get you to do that in 2 minutes?
Okay.
So I'm going to get Maria to introduce
We'll
what she
move
does,
on.
and then I'm going to get you to be the glamorous assistant. That's okay. I guess I have a question for you, Stephen. What is the How has creating the Portland Breeders Group changed things, and how does having that collection of the single breed fleece and the single breed society add value to the farmers who are in that group?
Good question. It's a difficult one because given that Portlands were almost extinct 50 years ago, down to 40 breeding ewes in the country and 8 males, and then 30 odd years ago the Portland Sheep Breeders Group was formed to try and encourage more people to take on Portlands, and we now have about 160 flocks across the country. I don't think it ever set out to be a project which could say, we are going to produce better wool, more wool, whatever. It was actually to keep the breed alive under the auspices of a Rare Breed Survival Trust, to actually make sure it didn't die off completely. And in a sense, wool was a byproduct, but it became more and more important. People realized that showing their fleeces in agricultural shows produced good results. Hand spinners liked the Portland wool, and it became more and more popular. But we still couldn't get through the British wool grading system, which would say, no, it's Welsh Hill Kempi. It should pay 5 pence per kilo. And so we needed another approach, and that's where the opportunity to have a pure Portland wool collective arrangement became such a joy. Thank you.
That's great, and it sounds like that has really added value for you and given you that kind of connection and scale as well.
Yes, I mean, it's not going to make anyone rich. We are still paying the shearers £100 odd, still paying even more for fuel. So we're probably no more than covering costs. But it comes back to the point that Maria made, and quite rightly made. There is a pride in knowing that one's product is actually going to produce something beautiful. It works. And so even if the cash position is more neutral, at least it's not a thumping great loss, which it was. And hopefully we can build it up into a positive economic project.
Great. So you'll understand why I delayed the glamour for a moment, because I want to ask Maria, can you talk about what happens after the fleece leaves the farm, and what you've done with the Portland sheep fleece, with a little bit of a reveal? But the bigger serious questions of how you've added value, how you've gained a market, and so on.
Oh, right. Well, I guess when RBST and Stephen and I had discussions about the Portland wool, I was saying someone will buy it because if you collect it, you can sell that as breed specific. There's value in that because there's value in the story. And I know that from, processing our own wool and doing Lake District tweed, it's a non-fiction narrative, and that's perfect because there's a truth in that, and that's really what people, without even realizing, I think that's what they really want to hear. I think people are I'm certainly sick of the kind of fiction of marketing, and but anyway, nobody came forward, so I thought I can't big this up and then walk away from it. So I kind of felt like, well, I'll just show them that it does actually work. So yeah, we just took the ton of Portland wool, had it all processed within, it was collected all together in Bradford, which was the centre of the wool trade for a really long time, and had it scoured there, had it spun in Huddersfield and woven in Oldham near Manchester. And we made, I'll show you here, it was actually one of the members of the Portland Society that chose these colours based on the hedgerows, the kind of summer hedgerows where she grazes her Portlands. And this is one of the blankets, you can see. It's just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And this is a tweed. India has worked on with a designer and made some beautiful clothing out of this, which is on our Wool Library website. Absolutely, it's just so lovely. So I'm really, really happy with it. It's such a nice off-white colour, which the Portlands are, and it's special, and I know it sells. We've done well with our Lake District tweed wools, and this will do the same. So yeah, there is a market. I'm able to pay more just because I guess it's about making sure everyone in the supply chain is paid properly, and rather than paying, well, that's the market price, so I'm going to pay the market price, just pay more. I make a bit less profit, but that's okay. I think you don't need to be so greedy with your profit. And what else to say about that, really? For me, it works. I've demonstrated it works, and we'll be doing the same this year because we want to make more products with the tweed.
It's really stunningly beautiful, actually. So, can I just come back, Jen? Sorry, it might be my blind spot, but in terms of the fleeces that you have, well, how do you use those? Where do they go?
So we kind of set up a sister enterprise, Fernhill Fibre, which has 3 dynamics to that. We commission yarns and felts for other companies that want to have a single farm origin, British breeds, 100% processed in the UK. So I can supply yarn, I can do a range of felts from pre-felts up to, something about 10 centimetres thick. I can commission hats, jumpers, socks. And so, small businesses can come to us, or even large, but, it generally is smaller business come to us and say, I want your fibre. And I go, yes. And I make it happen. And it's a little bit more complex than that, because people will come to you in November and say, I want, 100 kilos of brown fleece or something. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. So, we have to educate people, certainly that are not from the farming industry, as to, when fleece is available. And that yarns take anything up to a year, because you have to wait for your processing slot. And commissioning things, our socks, there was a certain coronation in the middle of my order, so I got socks in June when I wanted them in November because of the King's coronation. So there's stories around all of those. I also, Fernhill Fibre supplies sort of the craft industry, so I sell an awful lot of really, really top quality, like our top cream of the crop. 20% of our fleeces will go out individually to hand spinners all over the world, wherever I can get the shipping quantities correct. So we do have an online sale business for craft items. And then the other part of it is, to help me do all of this, is our education program. So Andy is a British wool sheep shearing instructor, machine and blades, and I teach wool handling. And what I think most importantly is we work with textile students, because they are the future of designing with British wool. So that's kind of our contribution.
Yeah, so there's very much that looking to the future and trying to build the skills and so on of the future as well within that, whether it be from marketing or design through to practical skills of shearing.
So at the moment, we do one-to-one with students that come and live on the farm, so they get to see the whole process. Ideally, I want to get into a college and teach or talk to 30 students at once rather than just one at once, but got to have ambitions.
I'm going to come back to Maria and particularly India in a moment about thinking about strategies and building out infrastructure and strategies and marketing and so on. There was just one, we were due to have another panelist on this panel, and I think I just wanted to ask a technical question, which is around scouring plants and quality, and the quality of wool that we can create in this country. I'm not going to name them, but I am going to read what their feedback from their experience was, because I think it's a really interesting discussion point, not about their experience, but about what it says about where we're working. And so what they said was, I'm in a bit of a no man's land. The large scouring plants have no interest in taking my small batches, 10 to 14 tonnes, for example, of wool, as it disrupts their system geared towards large volume processing. but the small niche scouring plants are also too small. My experience is that much of the newly and locally scoured wool has a very strong smell, is okay for weaving into rugs, etc., but no good for things like bedding and duvets. There's lots of technical detail, but she says, I'm not convinced that I can get that result by processing in the UK, and yet I'm hearing different experiences of that. So I just wonder, I understand that we have very few scouring plants and they are big, but I wonder just if you could speak to that technical challenge, perhaps, Maria, or for you, Jen.
Yeah, I mean, there's only 2 commercial scouring plants in Europe now, really. And the minimum quantity is 500 kilos, so that should be more than able to go through. But, I don't know her experience. If she's found a nice partner outside of the UK, that's perfectly fine. I think there's a lot of push towards local for local's sake, but you just have to, I think it's important to have partners that share your values. That's really important. We've always traded with Europe. I don't like cutting off those trade ideas, but it is possible to do it in the UK. I don't think anything I've ever made smells of wool.
Woolly.
And I know that there's so many people processing in the UK, and lots of wool comes from abroad to be scoured in the UK. I think only 30% of the scouring plant that we use is UK wool. The rest is brought in, say, from Norway, because they want our scouring. So I think there's nothing wrong with British scouring, to be honest. So I'm not sure, but it could just be that she's had one bad experience and that's put her off, and she's found a good partner elsewhere. So
that partnership along the supply chain sounds like it's really key.
I think it's a relationship, and if one relationship's broken down and once bitten, you don't want to go back and you find a different partner. I think it's just more important to have long-term relationships where there's commitments and responsibilities for each other. And if she has found that somewhere else, then I think
that's great. Thank you. One question that carries on from that is this question of how do we rebuild that infrastructure and build markets for wool, bearing in mind that a lot of farmers don't want to be processors, and we've already talked to that relationship space. India, how do you see people can build out strategies, or what infrastructure they need to enable farmers to really participate in these new markets?
Well, the work that Maria commissioned us to do was looking at, the first question was originally about certifications, but we switched it into actually who and where is value currently existing in British wool, or in wool, or in essentially wool, and what's stopping all these kind of different parts of it getting towards that value. And when you change that question around, really interesting things emerged, like certifications are 68% more expensive on land with 20 farmers where there's normally one, or where there could be one. So cost and value is really not. Also, often certifications don't look at farm gate cost value improvements as a result of the certifications. That's not data that's often collected. So when you start to kind of look at value and see where it's been driven, a slightly different picture emerges. And then when you start to look at barriers towards that value or towards that goal, what came out was a real infrastructure divide between the spinners and weavers, and the need for trying to access. And we were looking at this information for quite a while. Then Maria was like, I need a weaving machine, or a knitting machine. I need a knitting machine. And actually what happened was it created a very clear line for a whole new product. So it was that infrastructure across the 36 farmers within that, where so products could be made, like lots more products could be. The other thing about value and the strategy piece is wool is, I'm trying to think, what is it like? It's a little bit like whiskey in terms of price at the end. You can kind of do the calculations. This is £175, £200. It's a 2 or 3 kilos of wool that goes into it. Calculate that up, is that £70,000 a tonne? And that comes at the end, and it doesn't get worse over time like certain food. It actually holds its value. And if you know you can sell it, which there is a big enough market for the scale that the UK is, that shares the values if you can find it. There fundamentally is. So working with that entrepreneur that really finds and understands that brand, that's adding value back to the farmers, it can all be sold. It's definitely a branding thing. And then if we know it's there, can wool actually, if we know it keeps its value and wool can be sold, it doesn't disappear, could that value be loaned against? Could that cash flow be freed up? So could wool become a tool for regenerating and bringing cash flow onto a farm because we know it sells? There isn't many products that has that opportunity, I don't think. And that's when you really kind of tear up the rule book and just focus where those value pieces are. And it is the small that goes into the big that actually, that's how things really work. And diversity, back to this, the more stories. It's really interesting. There's lots of movement into LCA's life cycle analysis that are happening, and a lot is drawn from secondary data. The ground up data is the only data that's de-risking the supply chain. Everything else isn't true because it's an average. So, or if it's the best or it's the worst. If it's not true and people go to question it, who's liable at that point? So the farmers not only own the data, they own the only de-risked supply chain in terms of carbon and biodiversity. And that is a really powerful thing when you combine that with a product that retains its value for 2 years. And so you kind of flip all of these, we're too small, products get, and look at potential and value, and a very different narrative comes out. And I think, that's the beginnings of how I think we were sort of building a strategy.
I think that's actually a bit of a mic drop moment in terms of that piece around if it's not data from the farm, it's not true. And I think that's one of the things the Sustainable Food Trust has really worked on, the Global Farm Metric, to try and create something that looks at assessing what happens on the farm itself and building those tools to enable you to think about what you can genuinely justify and say. I think there's one other thing with that, which is that if we really dig into it, and I think it will take us, a shift in narrative, is that if we start thinking about wool as a valued co-product, that actually shifts all the way we look at carbon, for example. Not just the carbon sequestration in the ground and the way we look at those pieces, but looking at the value of that, any meat that comes from that animal as well, or any other products.
There was a bit I forgot to say. There's a slight bit of a heat stroke on the go. There's a bit I forgot to say. There's a farmer in the room where we were talking about this, and this is real fag packet calculations. But British wool has probably the biggest productivity opportunity within British agriculture today, if you're looking for that. And when you get the right supply chain with the right, or value network, as it probably should be called, with the right entrepreneur, what is the potential of that value? We can calculate it all out. It's a pair of socks a year. What's the potential of that value when we know brands like Victoria Beckham can sell at £3,000 a pop? So when we kind of really go for that, I can't remember the calculation, £1 billion a year potential. So it is some of the it has got some of the biggest potential opportunities in all the products, I think.
I'm going to put somebody on the spot and just check, because Chris, you might not have the data with you, Christopher Price from the RBST, but there was some data around the amount of carbon that's locked up in wool as well. Do you have that? If you're not, I can go away and write a blog about it or something. But sorry to put you on the spot.
That's fine.
But it was really powerful.
No, we did some research on the carbon content of wool, having heard that in Australia it was quite interesting the amount of carbon they were finding. So we did an audit of, they were mainly long wool breeds, but not entirely. And as I recall, it was about 45% of a fleece's carbon. That in itself isn't, I mean, it's important to know, but the reason it becomes significant is if the wool is then used for something that has some longevity, like being used in clothing, so it lasts for 20 years plus, then it qualifies as a sink, and therefore should be fed into farm carbon type calculations. It's not a game changer, but it's just a factor that adds more information to the decision making. Sorry, I should say there was a lot of variation. Surprisingly, darker fleeces held less carbon than lighter fleeces, which seemed counterintuitive, but that was what we discovered. There was a difference in male fleeces and female fleeces. I can't remember which way around that went. So I'm talking in terms of generalities. Yes, the younger they were, the more carbon they held as well.
Interesting. But I guess the point is, it's a different way of thinking about things, which shifts the narrative about what the product is that you've got, and how it relates to the regenerative outcomes of...
It was a response to George Monbiot and others using the language of sheepwrecked and woolly maggots. We were trying to show that it wasn't quite as alarming as some rewilders were saying.
Stephen, thank you for being both the glamour and the... mic holder
anytime
as well. Okay, so I have one question for all of you, which is, who should be supporting and helping you develop this? Where is this about the market? Is this about finance? Is this about support for local infrastructure from the government, for example? What do you need if you wanted to see this? Not necessarily you, but if others wanted to proliferate this, what do you think you need? Go for it, whoever wants to jump in.
Okay, sorry.
Money. It is so expensive. So this year, I said, we're having 9,000 kilos processed. That's very nice, but that's costing me, 100 grand? I mean, I don't have 100 grand. So actually, but last year our wool sales were 100 grand. So that's shown me that it does work, and we've tripled the processing this year. So that's why I'm investing in it, because I can see it works. I sold out of loads and loads of stuff. The sales were 100,000, and for all the processing this year. And then it's not like you spend that money and you can very quickly sell those products. That's money that's gone out of my account starting late last year, and I won't start to sell those products until this winter. So that's cash flow is a huge problem for me. But I know that if I had more money, I could do more, and so that's about the only thing for me.
To speak to that, wool keeps its value. It increases over time. It takes a long time to do. A loan scheme using wool as collateral is a really easy, quick win, because that money will come back again. And how governments can play a role in that, because it is a wool bank, if that makes sense. And if cash flow is the biggest inhibitor for growth, then that cash is just moving back and forth and going to where it's needed with very, very little risk, with the right entrepreneurs and the right brands and things like that, with very little risk. So
it's somewhat ironic, but 500 years ago we wouldn't be having this discussion. I mean, the Cotswolds churches and East Anglian churches are all built with wool money, and yet somehow we find ourselves in a bit of a bind, and I quite understand what Maria is saying. To find £100,000 is not easy, and certainly from the initial producer's perspective, I'd say, well, yes, it's a lovely idea, but it's really not going to be for me. That's the initial reaction, and you really have to get over that and say, no, actually, if we work together collectively, we can produce enough wool at a reasonable cost in very good condition, which can be made into something really worthwhile. One aspect we haven't really talked about this afternoon is logistics and the cost of fuel. If you're just moving 20 kilos of wool to a depot, you're probably spending as much money in fuel as you are going to get for the wool. So you've also got to consider that, and we need help with the logistics. And British wool have been a bit up and down on this. Hopefully we can still get that relationship working better. But it has been a bit of a bumpy road. But yet today, listening, speaking, seeing everyone else here, I'm confident we can do something better.
Okay, so yeah, I've got kind of a two-part answer to this. As Fernhill Farm, Fernhill Fibre, we are able to supply regenerative or verified regenerative wool fibre. We need the brands, we need consumers to be able to understand what regenerative, I think that's why we're here these next 2 days. So yeah, we need people to be able to, come to us with confidence and go, actually, yeah, I understand what our farm figures say. We are improving biodiversity. Our land is improving because of how we mob graze our, animals. We need people to understand that. On a sort of, global or British wool context, wool is just fantastic for so many products in so many industries. We need companies that are currently using synthetics to be able to find a wool alternative. Classic example I've just seen down here today is tree guards made out of Kempe wool, which are from the mountain breeds, which, as we know, are, you can't even pay the shearer to shear that wool off. Now going into tree guards, which will biodegrade and will eventually, after 5 or 6 years, once it's done its job as a tree guard, will put that carbon back into the soil. But we need more industry to look to wool as a substitute and get rid of plastic. That's what I think.
Yeah, and one thing we haven't talked about here today is things like the use of wool in gardening, for example, that point around the tree guards, but also in things like insulation and all those other spaces where there is potential. We've been very much focused around probably more the clothing and quality side, but yeah, it's thinking again about how you can go back and build your future and a resilient future with nature. We've got 6 minutes, and I just wondered if there's any questions that people had from the floor. I'm going to take the one at the back, Chris, and then I'll come to you. Okay. To one right at the back.
Hiya. I have bought some wool fat soap in the past for cleaning garments and for like body lotion and that kind of thing. I was wondering, with the talks that we have variously around like toxicity and that kind of thing, if you have any knowledge of whether that's like what happens to the lanolin and if that is much of a revenue stream and if it has kind of potential to feed back into the care of our wool garments.
So one of my other businesses is the soap dairy. So I make soap and I make wool wash using lanolin. But I asked the scourers if I could buy the lanolin, and they said no, it gets shipped off to Thailand as food for prawns. So that was a bit disgusting. So next time you're eating a prawn, they're eating the fat from your wool. But actually now, next time I went just more recently, and it was being made into a synthetic B12 vitamin. So it is used. They don't waste anything. I mean, these companies, they keep the water temperature low. It's all about cost initiatives, which is really about, same as a farmer, there's no waste because that's money. So nothing is wasted. Even the little scraps of wool, it's turned into something because there's money in that. So none of the lanolin's wasted.
But not necessarily going back to the farmer.
No.
To Chris and then to the gentleman over here. Can we go to Chris first? Sorry.
Hi, I'm not quite sure who this is for. I suspect all of you. As you were getting towards wrapping up, you were talking about using wool for other purposes like packaging or tree guards. Isn't that a sort of an admission of defeat. I mean, you've all been talking about what a great product wool is, quite rightly. Shouldn't you be aiming high, producing high value, lucrative type products rather boring, mundane things like packaging and tree guards?
I think, in my understanding, a lot of the packaging wool comes from Turkey. So you may know, but you'll know this better than me.
The main company that does it, Cool Farm, something or other. Yeah. Yes, they get theirs from Turkey, but I gather there is now an English company which does the same thing using native stuff. But that's so my bigger point is, are we more likely to make a go of it by aiming high with niche, high value products rather than trying to do lower value products?
It's a really good question. I don't know if you have any thought there.
Can I go for it?
India?
Go. So in our research of where value lies, we sort of came up with this saying that wool knows no bounds. And we found it as the best air filter in aerospace. And there's a lot of products going up to the space with the development of AI. It is the main ingredient for the first net zero trainer. I think the imagination with designers in university, but designers in material labs and places that are looking for something which we think we probably understand, but when we just don't know its potential, I don't think. So the relationships with those universities, there's great material labs looking at wool, and it's coming up in the oddest of places. And air conditioning units is wild because so many countries need clean air in their houses because of the pollution, and wool seems to be one of the best cleaners in that filter kind of area. So yeah, aim as high as you want, I think.
Stephen?
Can I just add something to this? Wool can be a super product, but if you take the wool coming off anyone's sheep, you'll know that there is a shitty end to it as well. And the point is that no fleece is absolutely perfect all the way over. Well, I'm sure Jen can criticise and comment on that. Some fleeces are. But even our best fleeces, I'll pick them over and I'll end up with a tub of rubbish on the side. Now, so we can do both. We've got to have some value in the chain to make it worthwhile, but there will always be some which ends up on the garden, in the shed, in the pillowcase, whatever, as long as it doesn't smell if it's in the pillowcase.
Just quickly, what I would add to that again is fibre length. There is a lot of fibres that come off a sheep that are simply too short to be spun. So I turn them into what we call the non-wovens. Non-wovens have no memory, so they're not very good in the textile industry, but they're fabulous in the thermoregulation industry. They're non-flammable. They are really good for us for absorbing toxins and all sorts of other things. And yeah, I think there's room for both too.
So we're at time. If we will be allowed, are we the last ones for the day? Yeah. We have a couple of minutes. So we've got. I'm just going to take three. Okay, this gentleman, this lady here, and this gentleman here.
My question is about Swaledale sheep. So many of the things you talked about earlier reflected on the Swaledale sheep, which is a very important value in raking out naturally across hill, heather moorland, and is important for that in its own. But the fleece is very poor quality micron, and I suspect the length of it is not good either. Is there any hope for something like that? There are plenty. North York Moors, we have national parks, Dales National Park. There's all sorts of angles that you could take on this. Is there a hope for a product like that?
Yeah, actually we have, there's a Japanese buyer, and that's her favourite wool to use, is Swaledale, and she's got the most beautiful jacket made out of hand-spun, hand-woven out of 100% Swaledale. I think we were talking about that earlier, weren't we, John, that all sheep used to have far more wool on them when wool was the money maker, and it's been bred out of them. And Swaledales have been bred for being hardy but brilliant mothers, and you're breeding. You want to breed more recently for animals that don't have wool and the wool quality isn't looked at. But we know loads of farmers that breed for good quality, not particularly Swaledales, but Cheviots. And it is amazing the difference from someone who's choosing to breed excellent quality Cheviot and someone that's just breeding for a good carcass. So you could definitely, it wouldn't take many generations of the sheep to get a much, much better quality Swaledale wool. But even as it is, you can still make a nice Swaledale tweed. There's no reason that you can't.
That's great. Did you go? Oh, yep. You've got a cheeky smile on your face, so I was a bit worried what we were going to get.
No, it's just going back to Stephen, that wool's been seen as a commodity and to be sold in bulk, and so like we've been working with the wool board for a bit, but you know the single species wool just isn't there. They just it's graded and chucked in a bin, and it's mixed with other stuff, and yet the sort of rare breeds crafters and people are looking for, and so people have been selling it themselves rather than going through the wool board. And so with the RBST, we said, look, let's try it with a single species, and the wool board are getting on board with that. So it's like the Welsh badger faces. They ripped every fleece to bits and put the black in one, and you've got a natural wool that's a beautiful colour. So it's getting a mindset rather than going by these specific grades. Let's look at the breed rather than the grade.
Great point. And the importance of RBST in driving that change as well. You get the last question, so it better be good.
It's actually quite interesting that, to your point, that do you think there's a lack of education or confidence with farmers that when they are rolling their wool, they put in all these different types of fleeces? Because, in the UK, we will have mixed flocks. We're made up of lots of different breeds. It's not so much like Australia where it's masses of the same breed. So do you think that it's something that's an educational confidence, and how could we rebuild that farmers understand that there is a value, but the fleeces should be treated a specific way on farm, so then when they go ahead, it's resolving some of the problems later on? And also, is there the potential to move away from the mixed flocks into a specific breed to then start to build up that uniformity and then also add the value back in? That makes sense. That might be quite broad.
I would say, we spend a lot of time carving up fleeces because I'm going for the top end. I'm going for woolen spun and worsted spun yarns. So for us, we add value to our farm gate prices by carving up our fleeces. We have a purposeful built 4-stand sheep shearing shed, so they are not shorn on straw or sawdust. And, we make sure that what we put into our yarn batches are all the same length and the same strength. So we've carved out a business with hybrid vigour. So, selecting really good British breeds to create a sheep that's 100% grass-fed, can fit in with the regenerative model, and we add value by carving it up. And I say, would you mince your fillet steak? Would you put it all in one bag? I don't think you would if you were, running a business, adding value to wool. So that's just our personal model, though.
So can I just say a huge thank you to Megan and Julie, who are looking like they're leaving for the wool demo, for putting these sessions together. I'm just your MC. So big thanks, and to Little Ivy, who's going off there somewhere as well. And a huge thank you to all of our speakers. And you need to get a drink of water and in the shade. But a huge thank you to all of our speakers. Again, a different but a really exciting and inspiring conversation, and huge opportunity, clearly, to play for going forward. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.